Hello, Willow. For some reason, I have misplaced or somehow deleted the original review of your five characteristics observations, and so I will create another one. So I'll get another look at it, and we'll take another review. So I apologize, but we will get this recreated for you. So we'll share the screen and get to looking at your work. So the first thing that I do with all of these videos is to do an overview. I just look at how you've posted the work, whether you have it complete, whether you've put all of the elements up there, whether they're in the particular order that we've asked for them to be in. DITCH is a clever acronym, DITCH, to help you remember the five elements, but it's also indication of the relative order that you address them in. Certainly D would always happen first, direction. That's where you address the key light. That's where you address that first most important light, the direction of where the key light comes from. One could argue that the others, intensity, temperature, contrast, hardness, kind of happen at the same time after that. You address those other elements kind of together, but you're almost always, not almost, you're always addressing direction first. So we would want that to be the primary thing that you work with. First, it looks like you have that in there. Then you've got intensity here. We're all in grayscale so far. You've worked with temperature here, in color, that's good. Contrast, you're back in monochrome. Good. Everything seems to be in order. I'm noticing also that your exposures, whether the images have a good tonal range from light to dark, those all look good. You don't look like you're way overexposed or underexposed. Overexposed being too light, underexposed meaning too dark. None of that looks out of order. Another thing that I'm noticing is your compositions. You are doing a very, very good job taking advantage of the entire picture plane. What I mean there is, even in an image like, like this, that's very simple and straightforward, you've got a few elements going on there. But what's happening is you are activating from edge to edge, from top to bottom, all of the picture plane. You're addressing the entire view frame. It can sometimes be a habit of, especially new photographers, to be looking at one particular area of the viewfinder and just be kind of concentrating on that, particularly maybe the things that they are focusing on or in focus, and then kind of forgetting about what else is there. We do that a lot in things like drawing because we're concentrating on what we're trying to render. And so with photography, we kind of sometimes translate that and do that. With photography, it's all subtractive. In other words, everything's in front of us and we start to eliminate via the viewfinder. We kind of crop out or move the camera over, or we use focus to kind of blur out things and stuff like that. But what's left in the viewfinder is everything. That's the whole image. We can't just sort of disregard stuff. So we want to be activating the entire space, and you're doing a very good job of that. Your use of light, not just that you're using direction, but you've got these elements here where the light is playing an important part of your composition. We have a little bit of extra noise over here. It is, in a way, playing a part of the composition because you've got it balanced off over here with the same kind of shape. I would have maybe made another choice about that, but nonetheless, you are at least attempting to use the entire picture plane. This is very clever, though, to use this sort of curve here. It's an excellent use of that space. It looks like you have a pretty good handle on the directions themselves, meaning where the light is positioned. This is in fact direction 4. This is direction 5. So it looks like in terms of the actual technical part, positioning in position 8, yep, that's position 8. You're doing that all properly. Moving into intensity, this is where we added the extra light, the fill light. You still work with direction first. So you build from that. So you start off with a key light, and then when you add a fill light to that, what you're doing is essentially using that extra light to increase the intensity of the scene. In other words, bring up the light levels, but you're also using that extra light to fill some of the darker areas, some of the shadow areas. The important thing to remember about the fill light is that it always is lower in intensity than the key light. It should be visibly lower in intensity than the key light. It should never be competing with the key light. There shouldn't be a confusion about what is brighter, the key or the fill. The fill should always, 100% of the time, visibly look lower in intensity than the key light. We should still be able to see where the key light is coming from. It shouldn't diffuse it away in that way. And it looks like you're doing that. It looks like you are using the fill light very effectively, even in something like this, where you're bringing another light in at a very low intensity, in fact, but you've got that other light in there to just sort of augment what you're doing instead of trying to counterbalance it. What would happen if you started to have the fill light too bright is you would get a sort of like two light sources competing with each other, and there would be a conflict that's happening. Not contrast. Contrast can be good, but conflict happening because the eye would be sort of struggling to identify where the light source is coming from, rather than sort of seeing a harmony happen between all of the light sources. So you're doing a pretty good job there as well, maintaining the consistency of the composition. Again, we do have this sort of glitch here where you've got the background. Just pay attention to that as you move forward. We want to avoid that when we can. Sometimes it's hard to see when you're looking at such a small viewfinder. That's why we want to see them on a larger screen as we're making our choices. Temperature. Now, a few students have done this as well. This kind of is where this can happen, where you've got a lot more to think about with the temperature scenario, because you've got the key light now, direction. You've got the fill where you're looking at, augmenting and bringing up the intensity, deciding how bright or not bright that is. You're now starting to think about the color of the lighting. You're turning and you're adjusting the temperature of the lighting. Now you're also adjusting, modifying the settings, the white balance settings on the camera. That's a lot, right? That starts to become a lot of things to think about, especially the first time you're doing it. Some things start to fall away, composition starts to fall away. It doesn't look like the composition's falling away, but we're starting to get a repeat of the same composition as you're posting it, which I would rather have multiple compositions with the lighting solutions. You're not the only one. I've decided to go ahead and in the future, the next time I do the class, to make sure I clarify on the instructions that we want to make sure to have a variety of compositions. I'm not going to ding a bunch of people for it, because when I see multiple students do a thing, and multiple students have run into this, I put it basically on the instructions, that I was not clear enough on the instructions. So I'm just noting that to say that you're not alone in that I would rather have had more compositions, but we'll clarify that later. But you keep a note of that moving forward, that unless otherwise specified, like for instance in the aesthetics and control that we're working on as you're watching this video, that has some built-in ones where it's going to look like the same photo over and over. The instructions really clearly say the image should look very consistent throughout. Every image should look very similar. In this it didn't. So that said, you are exploring different subtle color variations. That's the idea. One of the really interesting things you can start to do with this color temperature experiment is mix. You can start to use a warm cast to the key light and a cool cast to the fill, or vice versa. You can start to shift the colors to a very warm or very blue, a very surreal look to it. This was really all about exploring. This is really about discovering different color swatches and things. It's less technical and more about just identifying what different settings do and what they offer you aesthetically. Not every experiment that we're doing is all about technique. It's sometimes about discovery, and that's what the temperature is really all about, identifying that, hey, you've got these options going on. Contrast. Now, contrast is where we were adding the reflector. Don't forget reflectors. Carry reflectors, your experience with reflectors with you as you go. Reflectors where you're bouncing light back into the scene with a card, with a reflective surface, with a white surface, a silver surface, a red surface, whatever surface is going to reflect light back in there. A red surface will reflect red light back into there because it's going to bounce off of the red card and give a red cast to the scene if you're using color. It's kind of cool. The reflector is a very useful tool. So I oftentimes, again, see students, they'll do the contrast there, and then they'll stop using reflectors for some reason. Reflectors are a wonderful tool. It's an inexpensive tool. It's an easy tool to use. I actually would encourage you to consider using a reflector even before you start to add fill lights. I would use a reflector before I added another light. If the reflector isn't enough and I need more intensity, need more brightness, then I would go to the extra light. But I start off usually with a reflector before I add another light to it, just to keep things simple in that way. Excuse me. Preempt a cough there. But it looks like you're doing that. The fill gives you a whole nother look. I mean, the reflector gives you a whole nother look rather than the fill. As you're discovering, when you add that card, it doesn't brighten the scene. It just illuminates the shadows in a way that is very unique and much different than you would if you were adding a light. If we were adding a light here, it would look a lot different than the subtle glow that you're getting, the quite beautiful glow. Whether you know it or not, you were already doing reflections even when you were doing the direction, because the bottles were gray, and if you ever had a bottle that had light hitting it and that light was bouncing off and hitting another bottle, that was reflection. You were doing the contrast right there. So light would have hit a bottle and that light would have been redirected back to another bottle. Right there, that is the principle of contrast as we work on it. So don't forget contrast. Don't forget using those reflectors. A lot of students do. Hardness is another one, and that is diffusing the light. Diffusing the light will help you control the nature of the shadows. The nature of the shadows meaning, are the shadows soft or are the shadows hard? And what that actually does is it controls a transition from the shadows to wherever they happen to be going. The softer those things are, the more organic or the less graphic the scene is going to look. You can do it in a way that you can totally remove the layers of shadow altogether and create this wonderfully sort of soft and atmospheric look to the scene, which may not be what you're going for, so you do a mix. You do a key light that is totally soft, and then you just throw a little bit of the fill in there without a diffuser on it, and it gives you this little sparkle highlight. It's a wonderful technique to be able to kind of get the best of both worlds. This part of the experiment was all about that. It looks like you're doing a fairly good job with that. You're identifying it fairly well. I like that you're putting in the notes. Taking notes and then being able to identify them are good. I would have liked to have seen even some notes here. You might have been taking notes on things like contrast and taking notes on temperature, what the settings were on the temperature. I didn't necessarily ask for that to be put on the blog, but if you're keeping them, that's important, because if you discover, for instance, what the settings are on this and you're like, wow, I really like that combo, I would love for you to be able to reproduce it. It would be really great. If you see something later on, you're like, wow, that's really nice. How did I do it? It would be great if you could go back to maybe a notepad or whatever, even if it's on your phone, you're just taking notes. You'll be able to do that. You'll thank yourself for that. So if you're keeping notes, fantastic, great, keep doing that. If you're not, start getting in the habit of doing that, especially as you're learning, because I want you to be able to come back and reproduce stuff that you discover. Nothing's worse than making something that you're really interested in and then not being able to do it again. You're like, oh man, how did I do that? And you're just racking your brain over it. So again, I apologize for for misplacing your video. I think maybe I must have deleted it somehow, or I have no idea. I'm just at a loss as to what happened, but I do apologize for that. I do have this posted now. I will be sure to save the video, and I will see you in the studio. All right, bye-bye now.